Salman Rushdie, winner of the Booker in 1981 and the Booker of Bookers twice later, creator of several literary novels, essays, fables, short stories, satires, deftly combining magic realism with historical fiction, and with a habit of holding up a mirror to individuals, societies, and countries, nudging us all towards hope in the anything can happen age. With his latest book, Quichotte, Salman has reimagined Cervantes' classic Don Quixote, often hailed as the first modern novel. Cervantes wrote about an old Spanish nobleman who goes mad reading an overdose of chivalric romances, while Salman presents an aging American Indian pharmaceutical salesman whose brain is addled by too much television watching. Both characters, separated by a mere 4 centuries, set off on quests that take along readers on a picaresque journey, which is as comic and engaging in the literary and intellectual space as it is tragic in the emotional sphere. If Cervantes wrote Don Quixote to satirize the culture of his time, let us hear from Salman himself what his Quixotte's quest is.
So nice. I mean, I have not had a chance to speak with an Indian audience for several years now, so I'm very happy to do it.
Yes, and it's wonderful that you chose our platform to do that. We are delighted because of that. So I'd like to really start off, Salman, by asking you about, the importance of stories, how the story is actually the central character in all your books. And perhaps the one thing that binds all your books and is the central motive for them all. So you've always said that we all have stories, all of us have stories, and that discussion of those stories and questioning of those stories is very important. So I'd like
to. I mean, I think this goes beyond literature. I mean, I think as human beings, we are all people who tell each other stories to try and understand the kind of people that we are. To try and it can be at a personal level, it can be at the family level. It can be at the community level, and it can be at the national level. The nations have national stories, and families have family stories, and we all use this strange thing, this idea of narrative as a way of telling us the story of ourselves. So it's a more fundamental human need than just something that writers do. Is what I'm saying. But and so for me, as a writer, it's always been very important to have a very strong storyline, because I think there are great books that are written in other ways where the writer is more interested in focusing on psychology or form, formal devices. And I mean, those are, of course, very important in any novel. But for me, the story is the engine. I always say to students, if you want to build a big car, you should put a big engine in it. Yes. And for me, the story is that. It's the thing that drives everything else.
Yes. And then there's not just one story in your books. There's stories within stories. There's yet another author sitting in the book telling a story. And stories come out of stories. And there are so many of them, which is so unlike really literary fiction. Because when you're reading
but it's quite like the kind of fiction that I first grew up with. I mean, if you read things like the 1001 Nights or the Kathasarit Saga, or those old ancient story compendiums, they love stories inside stories. Yes. They love to have crowds of stories competing for your attention. And even if you go to, as I have done, go to listen to oral storytellers in, like, for example, I did this in Kerala many years ago. Their performances are also, they're not just one story. They're like 6 stories jumbled together, some of which are personal, some are political, some are mythological, and they all, they're juggled like balls in the air, And so for me, that was always very interesting, and I wanted to find a way of doing that in a written down form, to try and tell, because, if you grow up in India, the first most obvious fact about India is multitude. Stories are never, our stories are never just one story. They're a story amongst a huge crowd of stories. And I thought, how do you represent that? How do you represent a world which is crowded with stories through which the story you want to tell must make its way?
Yes.
And I've always, in a way, been thought like that.
Yeah. And indeed, a story is the best way to get your message across and to ensure that it sticks in human minds, because we
I
we
agree with that.
react, respond so much better to people and their stories than to a didactic form of writing, which yours is not at all.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want I don't like to speak as a reader. I don't like books that wag their finger at me and tell me what to think,
Yeah.
and my view is that's my business, and not, I don't like being lectured in
Exactly.
in a novel. What I like is to create a space which the reader likes to be in, and the reader is taken on a journey that they enjoy being taken on,
Yeah.
and then during that process, yes, you can challenge people, you can make them question things or rethink things or feel things in a way that they maybe didn't feel before, or etc. So but if have engaged readers with a story, then they'll follow you. They'll follow you because the great desire to find out what happens next
Mhm.
is the greatest driving force in literature.
Yes, absolutely. And coming to Quichotte, so what drove you to recreate a character that was so popular, Cervantes's?
Well, strangely, the Don Quixote aspect of the book arrived in quite relatively late in the planning. I mean, I had what happened was that I had written several previous novels which had been primarily set in New York City. Fury, 2 Years, 8 Months, 28 Nights, Golden House. They're all primarily not 100%, but primarily New York novels. And even while I was writing the last book, when I was writing The Golden House, I was telling myself that next time you have to try to have a slightly bigger canvas. You have to leave town and look at the country in a larger way, the United States. And what I felt is, now that I've lived here for, it's now almost 21 years, I felt that I was ready to embark on a kind of panoramic novel, a novel which tried to look at the society in a very broad way, and not just limited to Manhattan Island, and that was what I was trying to think about before I thought about Cervantes, and then, just by kind of one of those happy coincidences, about 5 years ago, I guess, somebody asked me to write, because there was a double anniversary of Cervantes and Shakespeare about 5 years ago. And somebody asked me to write a piece comparing and contrasting these two geniuses. And so I read Don Quixote again after many, many years. And I suddenly thought, well, this could help me, that this crazy old fool and his sidekick, could give me the basis or the origin point of my characters who will take my journey, And so I mean, I also have a crazy old fool, but the other book that really brought the book together for me, which is not mentioned so much in when people talk about this novel of mine, is Voltaire's novel Candide, because Candide is also a novel about a kind of innocent, foolish young man who's traveling through a world which is going through all kinds of upheavals and is a kind of dark time, not unlike our own. And the interesting thing, the subtitle of Voltaire's novel, Candide, is optimism. It's called Candide or Optimism. And one of the characteristics of Candide is that he is ludicrously optimistic. He believes he lives in the best of all possible worlds, even though the world is full of catastrophe. And I thought, I want that quality for my character.
Okay.
I want him to be absurdly hopeful,
Mm.
And when he meets people, he meets them believing the best of them, even when they're horrible old racists. He treats them courteously and as if they can meet, as if the best of themselves can meet. And I thought to have somebody like that who is very hopeful, very positive, and propelled that character across a country which is certainly until very recently has not been going through the most hopeful period. That the contrast of those things would be interesting and valuable. So the book came together by these kind of steps. And I mean, the other book that was very helpful in thinking about it is Pinocchio, because actually my Sancho Panza is not like Cervantes's Sancho.
Yes.
And has more in common with Pinocchio, who is the little the father doesn't have a child and is desperate to have a child and makes this puppet that then comes to life. And that's not so unlike the way in which my Quichotte, who has this desperate need for a child, creates a child out of his imagination. And so there's a lot of books. Thinking about a lot of books that gradually came together to create this book.
Yeah, and then Quichotte, his passion for Salma, the TV star, the reality TV star, and how he sets out on a quest to win her hand. And it seems so improbable, he being the kind of a person he is, and yet he feels love conquers all and goes on. Was that his redeeming?
That's kind of his foolish optimism. I mean, clearly she's way out of his league.
Yes.
I mean, and the chance of him having any kind of a hope of even getting anywhere close to her it's very unlikely. But he believes that love will find a way. And of course, Salma is a kind of joke because her name is, Salma R is one letter less than my name.
Yeah, but why did you do that?
Because people are always asking me which is the autobiographical character in the book.
Okay. All right. So your little joke with your friends, people ask you that question.
But what I like about, actually she became one of the characters in the book that I became most drawn to when I was writing it, because of the contrast between her public self and her private self. That as far as Quichotte, watching her on television, falling in love with her on the screen, is concerned, as far as he's concerned, she's a goddess. She's very famous. She's very beautiful. She's rich. She's influential. She's like perfect. But when we get to know her off the screen, we see that her life has not really been like that. Yes. That actually she has a lot of darkness and injury in her life. And in many ways is quite a lonely character.
It's a fascinating character. Yes.
Well, that's inner struggles. We have this illusion about people that we see on television that their lives are something wonderful. Yes. And very often that's just not the case, and so I wanted to have a real person who is portrayed as a real human being, as well as the fantasy woman that's in Quichotte's mind, I became very fond of her.
Yeah. Yes, I can make that out because any reader can, because of the way she's drawn out. The reader also falls for her and sister. Your character in London, she's also beautifully drawn out. Some of the best scenes in the book are there.
I mean, these are the two most important women characters in the book. And one of the things I've been really gratified by is that a lot of women reviewers of the book, have really been very positive about the way in which the women characters in the book are drawn, and I've always thought, actually, I really have always thought that in a lot of my books, the women characters are more interesting than the men. So I think in the Moore's Last Sigh, I think, Aurora is more interesting than any of the male characters to me.
It's amazing how you're able to draw them out so well, because, do you use real women in your life as your muses? Do you ask around a lot of questions?
Like that, but it is true that I mean, like I lived I had a very female family. You know, I have three sisters and no brothers. And even in the extended family of, you know, cousins and aunts and so on, there's more girls than boys, you know, in that world. So I always felt that I grew up in a world in which I became very comfortable in the company of first girls and then young women and then grown up women, you know. And I mean, even to this day, I find that I have more women friends than men friends. You know, and I'm not talking about romantic liaisons.
Yes,
I'm just
yes, I
talking
understand. Yes.
about friendship. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
but I mean, I've always had that in my life, to be surrounded by, in many ways, very interesting women. You know, and the books, I think, show that. You know,
Yes.
so they don't really draw on individual women so much as just that experience of being in a world of women. You know,
Yes.
for a long time. I mean, for all my life, really.
In fact, those two women in Quichotte seem the only real characters, you know, who you actually, you know, you walk away with them from the book.
Good. I'm glad. Well, you know, I think the book is so playful and surrealistic and so on and so on. But at the heart of the book, I think the emotional heart of the book is about family relationships. It's about brother. You know, there are two brother-sister relationships, which are both in different ways sort of damaged, and the question about whether they can be healed, you know, whether forgiveness is possible, you know, is very important in the book. And there are two father-son relationships, which again are difficult in different ways, and the same questions about whether the fathers and sons can come close to each other. That was one mother-daughter relationship. So for me, I find, what I think in general about fiction is that there's an enormous amount of interest paid to romantic love, you know, and kind of less interest paid to these other kinds of very powerful emotional relationships which exist inside families, you know. And I wanted to, at the heart of this book, I wanted to have those questions, you know, about how we are with these lifetime, because, you know, family is a lifetime relationship, you know, and how do we handle that, and what do we do wrong, and if we do something wrong, can it be fixed, you know? And one of the things I liked about the way the book turned out is that not all the relationships turn out the same way. But, you know, the two brother-sister relationships, the two father-son relationships, of course they are mirrors of each other, but they're not exact mirrors of each other, you know. Some of them go better than others.
They have the same issues and the same problems, but the resolution is so different in both cases. And in fact, some of the most beautiful passages for me is brother and sister in London, you know, and when they try to, the high emotions at that time when they're trying to work out their relationship, and the forgiveness, talk about forgiveness, about love, about family. And one of the most beautiful things, which is like, you know, you've grown up with a narrative, and suddenly in life you realize that your narrative was all wrong. And one of the sentences you use there is that a truth, if not told fully, is a lie. And that is, if that is possibly a narrative which is a lie, which, you know, brother has grown up with.
Well, it can happen in families that people don't tell each other everything.
Yes.
You know, that they sometimes, either because they're ashamed or they're embarrassed or they're angry or whatever can happen, you know.
Or you're just protective. You just want to protect
people
someone.
don't tell each other everything. And then if later in life you find out the thing that was not told, it can make you rethink your whole family history.
Yes. And the question of forgiveness, which you bring up, in fact, Sancho brings up, and he says that, is there anything which is unforgivable, which cannot be forgiven? And he says he can't believe it. How can families just not forgive themselves over something small, which possibly did not even have a great impact, and then spend an entire lifetime when a mere sorry or a mere phone call could have just resolved it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it is this, one of the strange things that I began to think about the subject of forgiveness is that, you know, sometimes we can forgive people even if they don't say they're sorry.
Yes.
You know, And sometimes we cannot forgive people, even if they do say they're sorry. So strangely, the apology is a question for the person doing the apologizing, and the forgiveness is for the person doing the forgiving.
Yes.
And they're not necessarily connected.
They're not connected. And
Very
then
strange.
coming to love for Quichotte is something that really redeems him. Like
Yes.
he's the fool who's going out on a quest, an unbelievable quest, which the reader knows is possibly not going to be, he's not going to find his lady love, or we believe that. And yet his passion and the intensity of his love is something that redeems the character and makes him quite lovable. His
I
belief.
think that's right, because he's clearly, in the same way as Cervantes's Don Quixote is clearly portrayed as being mad, and that everything he does, he's off his rocker. He thinks that windmills are giants, and so on. But there's a kind of nobility in him.
Yes.
There's a kind of seriousness.
And if love is a redemptive factor, what is your idea of love?
Well, in this book, romantic love, the love of Quichotte and Salma, is treated more or less as comedy, because it's a kind of an absurd love. First of all, it's a completely one-sided love, because she doesn't even know he exists, really, and so
He
it's treated.
sends those beautifully worded letters to her.
Sends these letters which kind of fascinate her, but also make her think of him as kind of something like a stalker.
Yes.
So when they first finally meet and she realizes that he's the guy who's been sending her the letters, her first reaction is to run away.
Yes, she's scared.
She's scared. So the love is, whether you can really call that love, he does, but whether we can really call that love is questionable. I think that romantic love is a kind of redemptive thing. It makes you feel better about yourself. It makes you feel better about your place in the world, and all these things. And sadly, it doesn't always last. And so I think we mix up things. We have this idea of love, of romantic love on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have this idea of an enduring relationship. And the two things are not necessarily the same thing.
Yes.
And
in fact, maybe they're quite the opposite, because
and yet sort of
love
socially
comes with an expiry date. And
yet in most societies, the idea of romantic love has been connected to something which should endure a lifetime, and sometimes it does, and those are lucky people, and sometimes it doesn't. In my case, sometimes it hasn't.
So do you really not believe in the institution of marriage, as you're known to have said?
Well, I've done it a lot.
Yes, 4 times.
So I must at some level believe in it. I don't know. I think never say never.
All right. Yes, that's the spirit. Okay. So going back to our book, and going back to Quichotte and his travels, and then comes in Sancho, and he's very different from the original Sancho, as we said earlier. And his purpose in life is to become human, and his purpose in life is to get a grasp on reality. Quixotte's purpose in life is love, like we said, and the author within the book, the one who's writing the Quichotte story, brother, his purpose in life, he feels that there's no other purpose left except to complete this book. Must we all have a purpose as well defined as these three have in their life? Because all three feel that after that, that's the end of the world.
I think most of us don't. Most of us, truthfully, don't have such a driving, clear purpose. Fortunate ones, I think, do, because there's something clarifying in life when you think, this is who I am, and this is what I want to do, and this is where I want to go. I think people who feel like that have a kind of clarity. But many people don't. Many people are just getting through the days, doing the best they can, and making their lives as
a purpose and a passion. Really, it elevates you. It elevates you above others.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was lucky in that from quite an early age, I was quite clear that I wanted to try to write, and it was always the thing, that I wanted to do. I sort of didn't have a plan B. So
Okay.
if it didn't work out, I thought, I had no idea what I would do.
You didn't have an option. You had to do it. Yes.
Yeah, and it wasn't overnight for me. I mean, it took me a long time, and I left university in 1968, and Midnight Children was published in 1981.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how long it took me. I mean, there was one book along the
You
way,
had a book
which
before that, yes.
there was one book along the way, but it didn't make that much of an impression. But
Mhm.
I've always thought that I was fortunate in that I had that sense of a driving purpose that just kept me going in that direction, And I think they do in the novel. They do have, the characters do have that, and for Sancho, what interested me is that, one of the themes of the novel is, if you like, a kind of breakdown of reality, the way in which now, as people say, we live in a kind of post-factual world, that it's people find it very difficult to distinguish between truth and lies because there are so many lies around us all the time, and not just political lies. I mean, internet lies, etc.
Yeah.
And so in this world where truth and lies are so confused, through which the characters must move, oddly, the most fictional character in the book, which is Sancho, who is the character invented by another fictional character,
Yes.
is the character who is most invested in the idea that there is such a thing as the truth and such a thing as reality, and it's what he wants.
Yeah.
So his quest is that, which in a way is also the quest of the book,
Yes.
so in some ways you could say that he's the protagonist,
Yes.
more than Quichotte, even though Quichotte is presented as the
Mm.
protagonist.
Mm.
It's really Sancho who is searching for the same thing that the book is searching for.
Yes.
Which
It's
is
interesting
what
the way you talk about your characters and the way you talk about the book, almost as if it found you rather than you wrote it, because you're talking
well,
about the
it,
characters like he becomes this and he made this. Is that how you write your books, all your books?
well, it more and more. Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I think a lot of writers will say this, that once a book is properly alive in your imagination, the characters very often will show you things about themselves that you hadn't suspected, and I think a lot of writers would say that. But for me, a thing has changed, which is that when I started out, I really needed a very detailed plan. I really needed, a lot of architecture.
Mm.
Before I could start putting flesh on the skeleton, I needed to have the skeleton completely worked out, and I mean, certainly when I wrote Midnight Children, that was the case, because that is a novel where the lives of the characters are so kind of mapped onto the history of the country that I have to know exactly how each moment connects to a historical moment and so on. So I had to work all that out before I started writing. Otherwise, I didn't know how to do it, So nowadays, I don't really think like that anymore. I mean, I'm more and more think of writing a book as a kind of process of discovery. That the book reveals itself first to me,
Mm.
and then I can reveal it to you, if you like, and I think of this as the difference really between like classical Western composition, like symphonies, where everything is written down, um, and with other kinds of music like the rag or like jazz, where
Mhm.
yes, there is a structure, but within that structure, there's a lot of room for
Spontaneity.
improvisation,
Yeah.
and for discovery,
Yes. Mm.
um, and I find that has become closer to my method
Mm.
now.
Okay.
That kind of rag jazz
Mm.
technique,
Mhm.
and so very often, yes, the characters surprise me,
Yes.
uh, and and then I think, oh, then what you have to retain is a kind of critical intelligence. If things show up on the page that you weren't expecting,
Mhm.
it's not always a good idea. So,
Yeah.
so you have to retain a kind of critical intelligence, which is able to judge whether the thing that has shown up
Yeah.
is worth keeping or not worth keeping. I mean,
So,
for example, the chapter in the novel in which they arrive in this town where people are turning into mastodons, I mean, that wasn't part of my plan for the book. That kind of just happened, and then I thought, okay, but do I want to keep this or not keep it? And eventually I did, and that because I understood how it fitted into the larger design, And sometimes your unconscious can surprise you because it can come up with things that actually are a missing piece of the jigsaw, but you don't realize it is until it shows up.
Very interesting. Yeah. So
Yeah.
your subconscious is working all the time and throwing up ideas and reaching back into the past and bringing up stuff that you are not consciously thinking of.
Yes. I mean, there are two bits of this novel. There's a bit of the novel, particularly in the later stages, when it acquires a kind of science fiction quality, and I used to, when I was much younger, I used to read a lot of science fiction, and then at a certain point I stopped doing that, But there were a couple of points in the book when I was uncertain how to do things that I knew I needed to do. For example, I knew that you mentioned that there are these two storylines, the Quichotte storyline and the storyline of the imaginary author who's writing that story. And I knew that for the book to really be satisfying, I had to find a way that by the end of the book, the two stories kind of merge, and that you feel, oh, well, it's kind of all been the same story all along, and I didn't know how to do it. For a long time, I was very worried. I knew that I needed to do it somehow. I wasn't sure how to do it. And then I remembered a sort of small science fiction short story that I'd probably read 50 years earlier. And had never thought about again, you know what I mean? So a story called Pictures Don't Lie by an American writer called Catherine MacLean. And it just came into my head and I thought, oh, that's how you do it. And it just solved the problem of the ending of the book.
Yes.
And so it's very strange how your imagination works, that it can reach back into some attic of your mind, and find something that
know about.
The forgotten in a box for half a century, and that could pop up and help you how to write your page.
Yeah, but there seems to be a lot of such stuff in your mind, in the attics of your mind, wherever, because there's a certain largesse to, well, most of your work, but there's a certain largesse to this book in particular. I mean, it seems to have everything. Is there anything missing at all? It's liberally sprayed with the references. There's cultural, political, regional, metaphorical. Then you talk about racism, you talk about the opioid crisis, you talk about immigration, assisted suicide, you talk about corporate fraud, you talk about sexual abuse, cyber terrorism. Then on top of it, there are celebrity cameos, there are literary allusions. It's on the whole a pretty complicated book if you really look at it that way. And several times you have to Google, several times you have to figure out who's who and who's what. Is the structure of the book and all these allusions deliberately put in there to reflect the complicated reality?
I'm afraid this is just the garbage in my head, and I mean, as we go back to what we were saying at the beginning, the thing that makes it work is that if there's a strong storyline pulling you through,
yes,
then everything hangs off that,
Yeah.
and it's easy for the reader to accept it. But
sorry.
from the beginning, I've really, as a reader, I have loved those books which try to take a very generous helping of the world, which try and take big armfuls of the world and pull them into the book, And I've always thought that there's two ways to write really well. One is that, and the other is the exact opposite, to try to take just one tiny, beautiful strand, and to write about that, and they're both equally good, but the question is to understand what is your own temperament, and my temperament has always been this kind of everything book.
To take the armfuls and
Yeah,
bring them.
the armful book. Yeah.
Yes.
And,
Yeah, no,
which
but
Henry James
reading
called,
it, reading a book like that is, it's at the end of it, you feel educated. You feel like, you feel it's really been worth it to go through it. And even if you have to several times Google and several times figure out.
For me too, because I always feel, I like to feel that when I finish, because you spend several years writing a book, and I always like to feel that at the end of the book, I know some things I didn't know at the beginning of the book.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Like
does
even
that,
a day, if you know something at the end of the day you didn't know at the beginning, it's such a rewarding experience. For a
exactly. So
book, it
I
must
feel
be.
that the books are discoveries for me too.
Yes.
I feel at the every time I've written a book, I feel at the end of it that I've learned something by doing it.
Yes. Yeah. The
Which can be
student.
something about myself, or it can be something about the world, or somewhere in between.
So the writing of the book helps you learn about yourself as well.
Yes, yeah. I mean, because I think writing serious literature is you have to go very, very deep inside yourself, in order to find the book. Uh, you have to examine and know yourself really quite deeply, because otherwise what you're writing sounds kind of phony. I think all good writers have a pretty clear sense of where they're writing from. What is the self from which the work is coming. And if you have that sense, that comes back to, we were talking about purpose. This is another way in which you could achieve a kind of clarity. If you have examined yourself well enough. I mean, I always feel I don't need therapists, I don't need psychiatrists, because I do it myself every day of my life.
It is like a meditation, really.
Yes,
It is
it is
meditation.
something like that.
Writing
It is something like that.
Is,
Yes.
is this the room where you sit and write your books, Salman?
That's it there.
Wow. Okay. So in a way, I'm glad we are doing this digitally, because we get to peep right into your room
We
where
get
all
to
that
see,
magic
which I
happens.
normally never let journalists come in here, but now
Yes. But
here
I'm
you
here,
all are.
right here inside your room. That's amazing. And what about the process of writing for you? When you actually do your writing, like, do you have certain timings in the day when you
Yeah,
write?
I mean, I do it more or less like an office job. I mean, I'm not very good early in the morning. I mean, I know writers who get up at 5 a.m. and by 12 noon they've done their day's work,
Yes.
and then they can have the afternoon off to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
I that's not been my way. I mean, I'm if I get up early and I try and write, I always throw it away. It's just
Okay.
always not good.
Yeah.
I'm better at night. Sometimes I can work quite late at night.
Mhm.
But it depends what stage of the book I'm in. When you're starting a book, the hardest thing of all is to make something out of nothing. So
But do you sit down with nothing when you start writing, or you already have an idea? The
no, I
book.
mean, obviously, I don't start writing until I've done quite a lot of thinking. And so I have something. I don't have all of it, but I have enough of it to start. And yeah. So, but in the earlier stages, I find that 3 or 4 hours a day you're exhausted. Really, you find you're not really writing well anymore. You're just typing. But when I get to the later stages of a book, when I'm revising and finishing a book, then I can work very, very long hours. Then I can work like 12 hours a day, more than that sometimes even, and just stay inside the book, and write, sleep, like that, eat occasionally. But yeah, so it depends on the stage in the book. But on the whole, I just, I mean, where are we? I mean, I usually start work by about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I do kind of a day's work, like anybody going to work.
Okay.
And I have no tricks really. Actually I do. I have one trick, which is I think that it's always been my theory that each day we wake up with a little bit of creative energy for that day, and it's possible to waste that. If you make phone calls or answer emails or pay bills or write letters or whatever, then it's gone.
Hmm.
So my view is always do the writing first, and everything else can wait.
That is indeed a very helpful tip.
Doesn't matter how urgent how unpaid your bills are or how urgent the phone calls are, they can wait. You do the work first, then you attend to everything else. I mean, I've always done that. The first thing I do in the day is to try and write something.
Yeah. And when you have said earlier that you really don't believe in, following a certain genre for your book or sticking to it. But having said that, your book is full of different types of genres. So there's magic realism, there is metafictional, the metafictional trick of a story within a story. Your book travels from picaresque to spy fiction to absurd to reality to real emotional family drama. So many things in one book. Did you mean this novel as a homage to different literary stalwarts and styles, maybe?
Yeah, but also as a way of saying that in order to catch hold of this very slippery and changeable kind of metamorphic time that we're living through at the moment, maybe you need to use every single technique of fiction there is in order to try and come at it from 12 different directions.
Yes.
To try and capture it, and
all the weapons at your disposal.
I think one of the great gifts that Shakespeare gave to writers in the English language is one of the many great gifts, is that he showed us that a work of literature doesn't have to be one thing. It can be tragedy and comedy and history and romance and all that, all at the same time. So if, for example, if you look at the beginning of Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 1 of Hamlet is a ghost story.
Yes.
Act 1, Scene 2 of Hamlet is political intrigues at court.
Mm.
Then you have Hamlet and Ophelia as you have a romantic story. Then you go back to the ghost story.
Yeah.
And
it's a murder mystery.
And it's a murder mystery, and there's comedy bits.
Yes.
And he shows you that you can do that. That a play in his case doesn't have to be just a tragedy. It could be these other things as well if you put them together properly. Of course, the trick is you have to be Shakespeare.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's a wonderful liberation to think like that. And since here you have the greatest writer in the English language telling you that you can do that,
you can do it, yes.
Then it's inspiring, Whereas, for example, the French classical tradition is much more formal. If you look at like Racine or Corneille or Molière, their work, it's one thing at a time. If it's a tragedy, it's a tragedy. If it's a comedy, it's a comedy. And I think the English language tradition is more liberated than that.
Is that how you think as well? Do you have a bit of magic realism playing in your mind all the time? Like when I read your books, I imagine that's the kind of a man you have to be if you write like that, going around looking at things with an amused eye, with your ready laugh and a little sarcastic. And is that how you are?
I mean, I guess so. I mean, I think humor is very important to me. I just, again, to speak as in terms of what books I like to read, yes. I find it difficult to read books which have no humor. I mean, I don't mean that they're full of jokes, and I mean that there's some kind of wit or humorous note in the way in which the author sees the world, and I hope that my books have that too. I mean, actually, again, one of the things that pleases me about the reception of Quichotte is that a number of people have said that they think it's just about the funniest book that I wrote, which
yes.
I think is high praise, because I've always thought comedy is harder than tragedy. It's making people cry, not that difficult.
Yes.
making people laugh much harder.
Yeah.
Of course, one of the things the novel is about is immigration, because almost all the main characters are immigrants from somewhere else,
Yes.
you know, and that is one of the questions that immigrants, particularly in a time of rising racism, that immigrant communities have to ask themselves, you know, and is certainly being asked in America right now.
So, what role does fiction play in an era where truth itself is suspect and up
Yeah.
for debate?
Yeah,
Do you feel the writer has a responsibility towards society and a nation?
No, I think a writer has a responsibility towards the truth, though, and you know, people sometimes say, "Why are you making things up when the world is full of lies anyway?" You know, and I think it's an important question, because there's a way in which fiction is the opposite of a lie, because the purpose of literature is the truth. The purpose of any serious writing is to say, this is what we're like as human beings. You know, this is how we feel. This is how we think. This is how we behave with one another. This is how our worlds are constructed. You know, this is who we are. You know, and that's one of the joys of literature, is to find in good books that portrait of who we are, which can cross boundaries of language and time and space. You know, we can read a medieval novel set in Japan, and it still tells us who we are. You know, so the purpose of literature is to go towards the truth, and it can do that by many different techniques. It can be realistic, it can be surrealistic, it can be anything, but the purpose is to move towards some human truth. You know, whereas the purpose of the lie is to obscure the truth. You know,
Yeah.
So in many ways, literature and lies are the opposite of each other.
Okay.
And I mean, and they're actually at war with each other. You know, which is one of the reasons why people who deal in lies very often find literature to be the problem. You know, which is why historically authoritarians have so often attacked writers.
Yes.
It's because of that conflict between a way of telling the truth and a way of obscuring the truth.
Yes. Did your experience with satanic verses and whatever happened after that, did that impact your writing? Did that impact you as a writer? Like, you know, for instance, when you wrote Midnight's Children, your criticism of Indira Gandhi in that book was pretty straightforward. You said what you had to say. And today in Quichotte, you do not even name the men that you're talking about.
Yeah, because I didn't want them to overpower the book in this case. You know, I mean, I think
they did not deserve to be there. Is that it?
Yeah, and I think I didn't. I mean, as far as Trump is concerned, I didn't want his name in my book.
Okay.
And
is that some kind of a superstitious thing?
No, I just thought it interferes. That, you know, it overpowers.
Yeah.
You know, that already we are living in this world where we have to think about him every day.
Yeah.
You know, and I just thought, at least in my book, he's not going to be there.
Okay. Yeah.
But also that the world I'm talking about, this divided country, existed before him, you know, and will exist after him.
Yes.
I mean, I think he's made it worse. But
Yes.
the fact is that I wanted to write about that divided country more than to write about him, you know.
Okay.
And similarly, the little bits of the novel that take place in India and take place in England,
Yes.
they're also talking about divided societies. But the divisions are not caused by individuals. You know, the divisions are caused by things deeper than individuals.
Yeah, there's
And I
a
wanted
beautiful
to.
passage there where you've spoken about how it's a similar problem in all these three countries, but how for different reasons, and the trajectory of the problem is going to be different.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we do live. You know, these three countries that I've spent my life thinking about. You know, India and England and the United States, and oddly, in the last decade or so, they've all gone through variations of a similar experience. You know, I mean, they are variations; they're not exactly the same.
Yes.
But you can recognize echoes in all three places. You know, And so I wanted that to be in this book to some degree. I didn't want people to feel I'm only talking about the United States, and I'm talking about something which is also happening in England and also happening in India in some way, and those sections, I'm glad they're there because they broaden the spectrum, the horizon of the book.
Who do you feel like most of the time? Do you feel like an Indian, like a British citizen, or an American?
I mean, I always have had. I feel more closely attached to cities than to countries. So I feel like a Bombay boy. But I've always thought that. And then London has been very important to me in my life. And New York, I feel very at home here. I mean, I don't feel at home, and there's a lot of the United States I don't feel at home in. But New York City, yes. So I think of myself as some kind of product of these three cities.
Yes.
Which I still call Bombay.
Bombay is something you keep going back to. And in this book in particular, you place two of your characters in the same area in Bombay where you stayed.
Yes, I know. And what's strange is that in Midnight's Children, Salim's house and all that, the neighborhood where he grows up is also based on the neighborhood where I grew up, but I fictionalized it. I changed all the names of everything, and this time round, I thought I'm not going to change the names. Why change the names? So I actually put these two characters, one invented by the other, both come from the same little group of houses in Breach Candy, which is also where I grew up. So that was, it was a way of making the book very personal. And actually, Salma at one point is living in that neighborhood as well.
Yeah. When were you last in Mumbai or Bombay, as you persist in calling it?
It's a long time now. It's 7 years. I mean, I came there when the film of Midnight's Children was opening, and Deepa Mehta and I came together to travel around and show the movie and talk about it. And then there's been a
time you came again after COVID.
I agree. I mean that sometimes it's made quite difficult for me to come to India.
Yes.
And that can be off-putting.
Yes.
And sometimes that's because of religious objections, and sometimes it's because of being engulfed in a kind of security operation that makes it actually impossible for me to be there, really. I mean, you can't go and have a coffee with your friends on Colaba Causeway if you're accompanied by like an army of men with guns. And so I don't know. It just became difficult for me, and it's sad because it matters a lot to me.
Yes, and you remember it with such fondness and nostalgia, and you would like.
I'll be back. I'm
sure you will. I'm sure you will.
Let the world open up a little bit.
Yes. So when like you spoke about going out for coffee with a friend and being recognized by people and having those guards around you, but even when you don't have the guards around you, anywhere in the world, wherever you go out for a coffee or for a walk or something, there must be a lot of people who just come up to you, talk about your work, your books, and tell me one interesting incident from there.
I mean, not as many as you'd think, because actually people are quite respectful. People are quite good at keeping their distance and leaving you to have your private time. I mean, of course, in the age of the selfie, there are people who want selfies. That's what they, once upon a time, people wanted autographs. Now they don't want autographs; they want photographs. So there's a little bit of that, but I mean, I think it's always, to my mind, it's very nice because it's almost always people who have cared about something that I've written, and if that's so, then that's I'm very touched by that, So,
but there'll also be many who just recognize you and pretend that they read what you've written and come up to you. Yes. So is there any one incident that stands out in your mind?
Well, the funniest thing that happened was actually what happened in New York. It was a long time ago. And it was winter, so everybody's dressed up in warm coats. And this other Desi gentleman came walking towards me. And he saw me, he stopped, and he asked me if I was me. And I said I was. And And he said, I just want to tell you that V.S. Naipaul is 10 times as good a writer as you.
All right.
And I said, oh, well, then you should be pleased because now you've told me.
Yeah.
And he said
His
yes.
life's mission is over.
He said,
His
yes,
purpose
I
is
just wanted you to know.
yeah.
And he walked off.
But there are characters like that all over Twitter. And you've of course left Twitter now. You came for a brief while. And
Yeah, I'm still occasionally there if I have some information to give, like to tell people that that like this week there's a story of mine in the New Yorker magazine. So I did say on Twitter that the story is in the magazine this week if people are interested to read it, So one of the great things about this lockdown period is that it has returned me, and I think returned many people, towards books. And the pleasure that one gets from, you can see there's a few books here, so the pleasure that you get from reading books.
Yes.
And for me also movies, actually. And I have been giving myself a kind of private film festival during this time of watching a lot of the favorite movies of my life, and that's been actually has been very invigorating because, I've always said that when I was young and thinking about writing, that movies were as inspirational to me as books were.
One of the things very clear in Quichotte is that you really enjoyed writing it, and you indulged yourself as a writer. You had great fun. You were having fun.
Yeah, once I knew what I was doing, I was having fun.
Yes.
It took me quite a long time to work out how to do it. Like when I started out all those years ago, the amount of Indian writing in English that was being done, was a small amount, and you could count the writers on the fingers of your hands, really, and of course there were some great writers, Narayan and G.V. Desani and etc. But now it's a flood.
It's a flood, absolutely, yes.
And the good thing about that is that the writing that is being done in every possible style and genre and form. So that it's a very rich, varied literature now. It's not like narrow spectrum. It's very broad spectrum, and I think that's very healthy. Because when I was writing Midnight Children all that time ago, I wasn't sure that Indian writing in English would necessarily survive in any way. I thought that after all, there are so many other languages to write in, and it may be that the Indian writing in English that's being done is kind of like the end of a tradition rather than the beginning of it, and well, that was wrong, because it's obviously turned out to be very flourishing. There used to be, funny story, the New Statesman magazine in England used to always have a little literary competition in the last page, where they would ask people to send in entries. And sometimes they asked people to parody well-known writers. And one of the things they often did was to ask people to parody the writing of Graham Greene.
Uh-huh.
And Graham Greene entered several times under pseudonyms.
Okay.
And he never won.
All right.
And he never
win.
He came second or third.
All right. No. Yeah, that's interesting, really.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, short stories are very different from novels in many ways, and they're an art in themselves, So if
you do both, you do short story as well as novel. But
yeah, I mean, I always feel I haven't written enough short stories. As I say, I have a new one this week out, but it's the first new story by me for a short story by me for quite a long time, And I have this desire to write more, but let's see. I mean, right now I'm just starting to write another. Actually, I'll tell you why not, because what I feel is that after 10 years in which mostly I've written these Western-based novels, these novels set mostly in America, and little bits in England, I think it might be time to come back to India. And I think I'm I think the next book appears to be an Indian novel. So,
Wow. And this is the first you're talking about it.
yeah, there you are. Scoot.
Right. Thank you. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. We shall look forward to that. You want to talk a bit more about it or just that fact?
Well, it's just in the very early stages. So let me get a bit further. But
All right.
but it's,
Look forward to that, definitely.
but it looks as if it'll be entirely set in over there, which means I have to come.
You have to come, yes, of course. And this is your first entry back here.
Yeah,
And,
exactly. It's been very nice.
Next year, I hope we have you physically at the festival. That'll be fantastic.
Well, just, now that the vaccines are coming, everything becomes possible again.
Yes. But on that note, thank you so much, Salman. It has been wonderful having you with us. Thank you, and see you here.
Real pleasure for me. Thank you.
Thank you.